He could roast presidents, make Frank Sinatra double over with laughter, and charm entire audiences with just a single insult. Don Rickles was known as Mr. Warmth, a master of comedy who turned biting sarcasm into an art form. But here's the shocking twist. Despite spending his entire career disarming the toughest celebrities in Hollywood, there was one man Rickles simply couldn't stand. A legendary actor whose stone-cold demeanor left Rickles frustrated in a way no heckler or critic ever could. Who was the one person that managed to get under the skin of the world's greatest insult comic? Don Rickles wasn't born into fame, fortune, or the spotlight. He came into the world on May 8, 1926, in Queens, New York, the son of an insurance salesman and a devoted mother who believed her boy had something special. Growing up in a tight-knit Jewish household, young Don discovered early on that his quick wit could do something remarkable. It could cut through tension and make people laugh, even when times were tough. Like many kids with big dreams, Rickles imagined himself under the bright lights of Broadway, not as a comedian but as a serious actor. After finishing high school, he even enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, hoping to become the next great stage star. But while he studied drama, something else kept slipping through. His classmates, his friends, even his teachers couldn't ignore it. His razor-sharp comebacks were often funnier than the lines in the script. When World War II came, Rickles served in the Navy aboard the USS Cyrene. He returned home like so many young men of his generation, hopeful, restless, and uncertain of what came next. Acting roles were scarce, auditions led nowhere, and he found himself hustling for small gigs in New York clubs. To fill dead air between his rehearsed lines, he would toss in a joke or a quick jab at the crowd. That filler became the highlight of his set. And in that moment, the path was set. The frustrated actor became a comedian, a man whose weapon wasn't a script but a lightning-fast tongue that no one could escape. But Rickles had no idea that his new style of comedy would soon rewrite the rules of stand-up and make him both loved and feared in Hollywood. In the smoky nightclubs of the 1950s, comedians usually stuck to polished routines: setup, punchline, repeat. Don Rickles, he had no interest in being like everyone else. When audiences didn't laugh at his carefully rehearsed material, he pivoted. Instead of jokes, he turned his focus to the people sitting right in front of him. He would look a man up and down and fire off a cutting remark about his haircut, his suit, or his date. Then he'd spin around and take aim at someone else. No one was safe, young, old, rich, poor. If you were in the room, you were part of the show. And the most surprising thing? People loved it. Instead of storming out, audiences leaned in, waiting for Rickles to land his next punch. This wasn't comedy about characters or stories. This was combat. Rickles stepped onto the stage, ready to spar with anyone who dared make eye contact. Yet what made it different, and why it worked, was that behind every sting there was a wink. He wasn't mean-spirited. He was letting you in on the joke. You could walk away roasted, but still feel like you'd shared a laugh with him. That's when he earned the nickname that stuck for the rest of his life: Mr. Warmth. The irony was obvious. His humor could cut like a knife, but it came wrapped in charm. Audiences had never seen anything like it, and word spread fast. Rickles wasn't just another comedian. He was creating a whole new lane in entertainment. But even he couldn't have guessed that one bold move, one fearless moment in Miami, would change his career forever. In the mid-1950s, Don Rickles was still grinding in clubs, building a reputation as the guy who could tear apart an audience and somehow leave them wanting more. But everything changed one night in Miami, when the most powerful man in show business walked through the door, Frank Sinatra. Now, most performers froze when Sinatra was in the room. He wasn't just a singer, he was a kingmaker. An icy stare from him could end a career. But Rickles? He didn't flinch. The moment he spotted Sinatra, he did the unthinkable. He lit into him with insults. "Make yourself at home, Frank. Hit somebody." Rickles cracked. The room went silent. For a second, people thought he'd just committed career suicide, but then Sinatra laughed. And not just a polite chuckle, he roared. That single laugh turned the tide of Rickles' life. Instead of being offended, Sinatra loved him. He took Rickles under his wing, introducing him to Hollywood royalty, making sure every star knew there was only one man who could get away with mocking the chairman of the board. Soon, Rickles was everywhere, trading shots on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, stealing the spotlight at Dean Martin's celebrity roasts, and cementing his role as Hollywood's court jester. He wasn't telling jokes anymore. He was shaping moments that people still talk about today. But as Rickles' career soared, he proved he wasn't just a nightclub insult comic. He had another side, one that would surprise even his biggest fans. Don Rickles may have built his name with a razor-sharp tongue, but he was far more than a nightclub insult machine. Hollywood soon discovered that beneath the wisecracks was a performer with surprising range. In 1958, he landed a serious role in Run Silent, Run Deep, sharing the screen with Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster. For a man who started out dreaming of dramatic acting, it was proof that he could hold his own among giants. And just when people thought he'd be boxed in as a serious actor, he flipped the script again, teaming up with Clint Eastwood in Kelly's Heroes, where his quick wit brought levity to the battlefield. Then came television. Rickles headlined the sitcom CPO Sharky, where his Navy background gave him the perfect excuse to unleash his trademark sarcasm. Audiences tuned in not for the plot, but for Rickles himself. Nobody knew what he'd say next. And while his acting credits grew, his reputation as a talk show guest exploded. On The Tonight Show or Late Night, Rickles wasn't just a guest, he was a storm. No script, no filter, just pure unpredictability. He could make even the most stone-faced host collapse into laughter. By the 1970s, Rickles had conquered stand-up television and film. But his biggest career revival wouldn't come from Hollywood's elite. Instead, it would come from a talking toy that made him a star all over again. By the 1990s, Don Rickles was already a legend. The kind of entertainer who had performed for presidents and roasted the biggest stars alive. But his career took a completely unexpected turn when Pixar came calling. The role? A plastic potato. Rickles became the voice of Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story. And just like that, an entirely new generation discovered him. Kids who had no idea about Sinatra, Carson, or the Las Vegas Strip now knew Rickles as the wisecracking spud with the sharp tongue. And he played it perfectly. His sarcasm, his timing, his no-nonsense delivery, it all fit the character like a glove. Suddenly, Rickles wasn't just a name from the past. He was part of one of the most groundbreaking animated franchises in history. And while adults admired him for decades of comedy brilliance, his grandchildren cared about one thing only: Grandpa was Mr. Potato Head. Rickles laughed about it himself, saying all his years of hard work were overshadowed by a talking toy. Even into his 80s, Rickles refused to slow down. He toured across the U.S., packing theaters in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, bringing the same old-school comedy that made him famous. He never watered down his act, never apologized for his style. If you came to see Don Rickles, you knew you were going to get roasted, and audiences loved him for it. But behind the curtain, away from the spotlight, Rickles' real story wasn't about the insults, it was about the one thing comedy couldn't protect him from: love, loss, and family. For all his sharp edges on stage, Don Rickles' real life told a different story. In 1965, he married Barbara Sklar, a woman who didn't fall for his charm right away, and that's exactly why he was hooked. Unlike everyone else, Barbara wasn't impressed by his jokes. She wasn't dazzled by the wisecracks, and that grounded honesty was what Rickles had been missing. Their marriage lasted more than 50 years, a rarity in Hollywood. Friends often said Barbara kept him steady in a world full of egos and excess. To the public, he was Mr. Warmth, but at home he was simply a devoted husband who adored his wife. Together they had 2 children, Mindy and Larry. Mindy followed her father into acting, while Larry became a successful producer. But in 2011, tragedy struck when Larry passed away from pneumonia at just 41 years old. For a man who spent his life making others laugh, losing his son was a wound that never fully healed. Rickles rarely spoke of it publicly, but those who knew him said it was one of the few times his sharp humor couldn't shield him from heartbreak. Still, Rickles found joy in his grandchildren. To them, he wasn't the legendary insult comic who sparred with Sinatra and roasted presidents. He was simply Grandpa, and more importantly, the voice of Mr. Potato Head. That generational gap amused him endlessly. After decades of work, it was the toy that won him the most points with his family. Barbara remained by his side through every high and low until her passing in 2021. Fittingly, she died on the exact same date they had married, 56 years earlier. A poetic reminder of a love story that endured as long as his career. But even with the stability of family and the loyalty of fans, there was still one thing Rickles couldn't overcome: a Hollywood legend who seemed immune to his humor. For decades, Don Rickles made a career out of tearing people down in order to lift them back up. He roasted legends like Frank Sinatra, Ronald Reagan, and Dean Martin, and somehow walked away as their friend. Presidents invited him to the White House, Hollywood icons asked him to roast them at public events, and even mobsters sitting ringside in Vegas laughed at his digs. Rickles had the rare ability to humiliate someone and still leave them grateful. But there was one man who never cracked. One man who stood firm against the force of Rickles' comedy. That man was Denzel Washington. Washington wasn't just another actor. By the 1990s, he had built a reputation as one of the most commanding presences in Hollywood. Serious, disciplined, and almost regal in his intensity. When Denzel walked into a room, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to prove anything. For Rickles, who thrived on cracking through that kind of armor, it was like staring at an immovable wall. Where Sinatra laughed, Washington didn't. Where others smirked nervously before giving in, Washington stayed stoic. People close to Rickles noticed the difference right away. For him, the reaction was the payoff. He lived for the moment when even the most dignified person broke into laughter. But with Washington, that never came. And it gnawed at him. Insiders recalled how Rickles would occasionally bring up Washington's name with a rare sharpness in his tone. It wasn't the playful venom he used on his friends, it was frustration. He'd quip, "I'll tell you who doesn't laugh, Denzel Washington. The man wouldn't crack a smile if you paid him. He makes Mount Rushmore look animated." On the surface, it sounded like just another Rickles joke. But underneath, it revealed something more personal. For a man who built his entire career on connection through comedy, Washington's refusal to budge felt like a rejection not of the joke, but of Rickles himself. That clash of styles highlighted their differences. Rickles was chaos, a whirlwind of insults and quick jabs, living in the moment. Washington was discipline, structure, gravitas. One wanted to tear down walls, the other wanted to project strength. Put them in the same room, and sparks didn't fly. They fizzled. For Rickles, it was the ultimate irony. He could make mob bosses laugh in Las Vegas. He could roast Sinatra without fear, but he couldn't get so much as a smirk from Denzel Washington, and that failure stuck with him. It wasn't hatred in the traditional sense. Rickles wasn't the type to hold grudges forever. But it was different. It was irritation mixed with professional pride. Because in his mind, no one should have been able to resist him. Everyone was supposed to break eventually. Everyone except Denzel. And maybe that's why this story still fascinates fans today. In a career built on making the untouchable laugh, the one person who stayed untouchable became the most memorable of all. By the time Don Rickles entered his later years, he had already lived a life most entertainers could only dream of. From smoky nightclubs in the 1950s to Pixar's Toy Story in the 1990s, his career spanned generations, yet his style never changed. He never softened his act for modern tastes, never bent to political correctness. He trusted his audiences to know that behind every jab was affection. Even into his 80s, Rickles was still performing. Las Vegas, Atlantic City, theaters across America. Fans showed up not for new material, but for the timeless experience of being roasted by Mr. Warmth. His body slowed down, but his tongue stayed as sharp as ever. On April 6, 2017, at the age of 90, Don Rickles passed away at his home in Los Angeles. The cause was kidney failure, but his legacy was far larger than any obituary could capture. Tributes poured in from across Hollywood, comedians, actors, and filmmakers all saluting the man who had shaped comedy with fearless honesty and lightning wit. He was laid to rest at Mount Sinai Memorial Park Cemetery, among other Hollywood greats. For fans, his gravesite became not just a place of mourning, but of celebration, a reminder of the man who turned insults into art. Rickles' career wasn't just long, it was unrepeatable. No one else could make presidents, mob bosses, and movie stars laugh at themselves without sparking outrage. No one else could weaponize humor so fearlessly, yet leave audiences walking away feeling included, not attacked. And maybe that's why the one person he could never crack, Denzel Washington, stood out so much. For a man who lived for the reaction, who thrived on breaking through the toughest shells, that single silence haunted him more than 1,000 hecklers ever could. In the end, Don Rickles was more than an insult comic. He was a storyteller, a pioneer, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. His voice lives on through laughter, through old roasts, through Pixar films, and through the countless comedians who followed his blueprint. He was proof that even the harshest words could come from a place of love. And while he made millions laugh, his story reminds us of something deeper, that behind every joke is the longing for connection. And maybe that's what made him unforgettable.